A Year in the Taiga, Diary of a Forest Hermit. Chapter 1. The First Day. Shock and Acceptance. I still remember the moment when I realized that I was alone. Not alone in an apartment or alone in the city. Alone in the taiga. The endless, silent, indifferent taiga. The plane that was supposed to take our research team to their place of work disappeared in low clouds, and I'm behind. Just for 5 minutes. 5 minutes that divided my life into quote 2 and quote 3. At first, there was a shock. The one they write about in books, but which cannot be described in words. It's not loud. It's not bright. He's quiet. The silence is so thick that you can choke on it. I stood at the edge of a forest clearing, clutching a backpack with field equipment, and listened. I listened to the hum of the engines subside. I listened to the rustle of leaves replace it. Then the cry of a bird. Then nothing. "Don't panic, Anya," I said to myself out loud. The voice sounded strange, unnaturally loud in this silence. "You have a backpack. There is a knife. There is knowledge." Knowledge. Yes, I am a biologist. I've been studying the taiga for 5 years, but I studied it in the laboratory, in herbariums, in lectures. Not here. Not like that. The first thing I did was sit down. She just sat cross-legged on the ground and closed her eyes. Breathe, Anya. Just breathe. Rule number 1 in an extreme situation. Don't do anything in a state of panic. Panic kills faster than hunger, cold, and predators combined. After 10 minutes of breathing exercises, I opened my eyes and began to assess the situation. Time, approximately 1400. September. It's still warm during the day, but the nights are already cold. Location? Somewhere in the Krasnoyarsk territory, several hundred kilometers from the nearest settlement. Landmarks. The river can be heard somewhere to the right. The mountains are visible to the west. In the backpack, a field diary, pencils, a GPS navigator, dead, damn it, a knife, a first aid kit, a flashlight, a sleeping bag, a light tent, some food for 2 days. 2 days, 48 hours, and then hunger. I got up and started acting. The first is to find water. A person can live without water for 3 days, but within a day dehydration will begin, and with it will come weakness, dizziness, inability to think clearly. I followed the sound of the river. She walked slowly, carefully looking at her feet. Taiga does not forgive inattention. Roots, holes, windfall, all this can cause injury, and injury here is equivalent to death. The river was closer than I thought, just a 15-minute walk away. It's small, fast, and has a rocky bottom. The water is clear and cold. I knew that you cannot drink raw water from taiga rivers. There is a risk of catching giardiasis or worse. But there was nothing to boil. I had to improvise. I found a small pool where the current was slower and started digging a hole a meter from the shore. Sand, pebbles, water. After half an hour, filtered water began to accumulate in the pit. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. I got drunk and filled my canteen. The first task is completed. The second task is shelter. You can spend the night in a tent, but you need to choose the right place. Not in the lowlands. Cold air accumulates there. Not under a lonely tree. It can attract lightning. Not on the animal trail. I searched for about an hour. Finally, I found it. A small clearing on the slope, protected from the north by a rocky ledge, from the south by dense fir trees. The ground is dry, with no anthills nearby. It took another hour to set up the tent. My hands were shaking and my fingers wouldn't work. Quote 6, I muttered, sticking in another stretch. Quote 7. By the time the tent was ready, it was getting dark. The taiga transforms at dusk. Daytime sounds fade away, night sounds wake up. Somewhere far away, an owl hooted. There was a rustle in the bushes, probably a chipmunk or a squirrel. I quickly gathered some dry twigs for the fire. She collected only those that were lying on the ground. Did not break the living trees. Making a fire turned out to be harder than I thought. There were no matches, just a lighter from the first aid kit, but the branches were slightly damp from the evening dew. 3 attempts. 4. On the 5th, the smallest dry twigs collected from under the roots of the spruce finally caught fire. I fanned the fire, placed larger branches, and built a proper, quote, 8, as my grandfather once taught. The fire broke out. A small, fragile flame in a vast, darkening taiga. And that's when, sitting by the campfire, looking at the dancing flames, I allowed myself to feel. Not to analyze, not to plan, but to feel. Fear, loneliness, homesickness, for people, for hot tea, for laughter, for the simple human, "How are you?" The tears flowed by themselves, quietly, without sobbing. I didn't try to stop them. Crying is normal. It's okay to be afraid. The main thing is not to let fear control you. After the tears ended, I felt strangely calm. Yes, I'm alone. Yes, the situation is critical. But I'm alive. I found water, built a shelter, and lit a fire. I took the first step. Dinner consisted of 2 energy bars and a sip of water. I ate slowly, stretching out the pleasure, imagining that it was a gourmet dinner in a good restaurant. Psychological technique. If the brain believes that everything is fine, the body tolerates stress more easily. Before going to bed, I carefully prepared for the night. I stowed my backpack at the entrance to the tent, in case I had to get out quickly. She put a knife next to it. The fire was carefully extinguished, covered with earth. A fire in the taiga is scarier than any predator. I climbed into my sleeping bag and zipped up the tent. The darkness was absolute. The kind of darkness that doesn't happen in cities. Not a single light, not a single glimmer of light. Only sounds. Lots of sounds. Creaking trees, rustling leaves, distant cries of night birds. I lay there and listened. At first I was afraid of every noise. Then I started to distinguish patterns, rhythms. It's taiga breathing. He lives his own life, in which I am now a guest. Uninvited, but a guest. Tomorrow, I whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow, the real struggle for survival will begin. But today I'm just eating. And that's enough. The last thing I remember before going to sleep was counting the stars through the translucent fabric of the tent. There were so many of them, infinitely many. And somewhere out there, under the same stars, people live. They sleep in warm beds, watch TV, and laugh. And I'm here. One, but alive. The dream came unexpectedly, as a mercy. Deep, dreamless. The body, exhausted by stress and physical exertion, shut down. And the mind has already started to adapt. He has already begun to turn the biologist Anna into the taiga hermit Anya.
Tomorrow the struggle
The
for
first day is
survival
over.
begins.
Survival began.
This rocky ledge protects the southern slope well. The view confirms it's a strategic position.
A year in the taiga.
This clearing might
Diary
work.
of a forest hermit.
The slope is stable.
Chapter
Trees for
2.
shelter.
Shelter over your head. Building a hut. I woke up from the cold. The pre-dawn light filtered through the thin fabric of the tent, and with it, the penetrating dampness of a September morning. His legs were stiff, and his fingers could barely bend.
Okay,
You
fire's
can't live
going
like
now.
this,
The hut. This is the
I
teepee
stated,
design with
crawling
main
out of the
poles and a
sleeping
doorway.
bag.
It'll be perfect
The tent
for shelter.
is a temporary solution. We need a real home. I spent the first 3 days looking for the perfect place. I walked in circles around my temporary camp, exploring every slope, every clearing. There were many criteria. Proximity to water, but not too close so as not to flood in the spring. Wind protection, dry soil, the presence of building materials nearby, and the absence of animal trails. And one more thing that is not obvious to a city dweller: a sense of place. The taiga, as a living being, tells you where to settle and where not to. On the 4th day, I found him. A small area on the southern slope of the hill, about 15 meters above the river level. There is a rocky ledge at the back that will protect you from the northerly winds. There is an open space in front with a view of the river valley. Nearby, there are several wind-blown fir trees, building materials, and a young birch tree, flexible twigs for binding. The land is sandy and well-drained, and most importantly, an old, dilapidated anthill 20 meters away. Ants are excellent engineers. They never build in bad places. Here, I said aloud, and the echo echoed off the cliff. Here, here, here. The construction started with a plan. I drew a diagram of the future dwelling on birch bark, a teepee of a taiga hermit. It has a round base with a diameter of 3 meters, sloping walls, and a conical roof. The height in the center is 2 meters, so that you can stand at full height. The entrance is on the south side to catch the sun's heat. The hearth is in the middle, but with smoke coming out. The first week was spent on the preparation of materials. Young Christmas trees as thick as an arm are placed on the frame. They did not need to be cut down, but carefully cut with a knife, leaving the stumps low so as not to disrupt the ecosystem more than necessary. I thanked each tree as my Siberian grandmother had taught me. Quote 5. Maybe it's superstition, but in the taiga, superstition becomes a part of survival. The frame was assembled using the Indian wigwam technology. The 3 main supports are connected at the top with a nettle cord. Nettles were collected along the riverbanks, soaked and plated, drearily but firmly. There are 20 more inclined poles around them. Each one was dug into the ground for half a piece, for stability. My hands were covered with calluses, and my back ached unbearably. But every evening, looking at the growing skeleton of my future home, I felt strangely proud. Survivalists' advice. When building a frame, always leave the entrance downwind. In winter, this will save you from drifts, and in summer, from rain, which often comes from a certain direction in the taiga. Walls. The walls have become a real challenge. At first, I tried to weave them from willow twigs like a basket. It turned out beautifully, but it was useless. The wind was blowing through the cracks. Then I remembered about the spruce lapnic. I collected the lower branches of mature fir trees, this does not harm the tree, laid them with scales like tiles, layer by layer from bottom to top, so that the rain flows down without flowing inside. But the real discovery was the birch bark. Birch bark is a unique material, waterproof, flexible, durable. It needs to be removed in the spring or early summer, when the juice is flowing, but I have adapted to do it in the fall. She found birch trees felled by windfall, made a vertical incision, and carefully separated the formation. Then I warmed it up by the campfire. The birch bark became plastic, like skin. I covered the lapnic with these sheets, creating double protection from moisture and wind. Roof. The roof was the most difficult. I covered the cone of poles with the same lapnic, but waterproofing was needed from above. And then I was lucky. I found an old, half-rotted boat bed, apparently the remains of some abandoned parking lot. I cut it into strips, soaked it with resin from fir trees, collected from damaged trees, and laid it on top of lapnic. The resin, hardening, created a waterproof crust. The construction took 17 days. 17 days from dawn to dusk. His hands were bruised, his clothes were full of holes, and his hair was matted into tangles. But when, on the 20th day of September, I brought my sleeping bag and backpack into the hut, when I lit the first fire in the hearth, lined with stones, with a chimney made of hollow trunks of young alder, I cried. Not from grief, but from happiness. My house smelled of tar, damp earth, and smoke. The rays of the setting sun filtered through the cracks in the walls, playing on the birch bark wallpaper. Smoke from the campfire rose to the hole in the roof, carrying with it the smell of fried fish, my first successful fishing trip. It was warm, dry, safely. I had a quote 7 that night. I made tea from willow tea, harvested back in August and dried in the sun. I fried the aspen mushrooms on the coals. I sat by the fire, listening to the wind howling outside, but inside, quietly, calmly. The house was protected. Before going to bed, I did something I hadn't done since the day I settled in the taiga. I undressed completely. She took off her battered jacket, pants, and sweater. I hung them by the fire to dry, and she got into the sleeping bag naked. The skin breathed, the muscles relaxed. I could feel every splinter in the floor, every movement of the air in the hut. It wasn't just a hiding place, it was an extension of me. My hands picked out every pole, my fingers wove every knot, my back brought every stone for the hearth. "Home," I whispered into the darkness, and the hut responded with the soft crackle of cooling logs. "House, house, house," echoed off the cliff. It started to rain outside, the first autumn downpour. Drops drummed on the birch bark roof, but none penetrated inside. The wind howled, trying to break through the walls, but the spruce stood firm. I lay there and listened to this symphony of elements and protection, and for the first time in many days, I fell asleep, deeply, without dreams, without fear. I woke up in the morning to the sun shining into the hut. The beam broke through the smoke hole, fell directly on the face. I stretched like a kitten. There was almost no pain in my back. My hands were healing, and there was a strange, new feeling in my chest. Not just survival, but life. Let it be primitive, let it be difficult, but life. She went outside. The rain had stopped and the taiga sparkled with millions of drops. The air was so clean that you could get drunk on it. I walked around the cabin checking for leaks. Everything was dry. Even the ground around it turned out to be well drained. The water went into the sand without forming puddles. "Well, Dum," I said, patting the wall. "Let's live." And Taiga seemed to agree. Somewhere high in the sky, a crane screamed, heading south. But I stayed. Here, in his birch bark wigwam, with a house I built myself. A Year in the Taiga, Diary of a Forest Hermit. Chapter 3. Water Balance, Water Search and Purification. A simple two-syllable word. In the city, I turned on the faucet and it flowed. Cold, hot, with gas, without gas. Here in the taiga, water became the deity I worshipped every day. A moody, dangerous deity, but absolutely necessary. For the first few weeks, I drank from the river, filtering through sand pits, and she got sick. Not much, but enough to understand that taiga does not forgive mistakes. 3 days of fever, weakness, intestinal cramps. I lay in the hut and thought, I'm going to die because of a sip of water. What an idiocy. When I got better, I swore never again. Not a drop of unboiled water, not a single sip from a dubious source. Water in the taiga is not just HO. These are Giardia, Cryptosporidia, E. coli, helminth eggs, and a dozen more unpleasant surprises that can put even the toughest survivalist on his shoulder blades. Important. Boiling is the only reliable way to disinfect water in the wild. Even filtration through coal and sand does not kill all microorganisms. Boil for at least 5 minutes at an altitude of up to 2,000 meters and longer in the mountains. My first task is to find a permanent source. The river was nearby, but it would freeze in winter. We need a spring. I spent a week looking for it. I walked along the slopes, looking for places where the ground was wet, even in dry weather. I listened. Sometimes the springs sing, murmur softly under a layer of moss and fallen leaves. I found it by accident, or rather, a moose brought me to him. I saw a female with a cub who regularly walked the same path. I followed them. They were walking to a small outlet of water from under the roots of an old spruce. The spring. Clean, cold, with a constant temperature of +4 degrees Celsius all year round. The water flowed out in a thin trickle, forming a small lake before going underground. But the spring was half a kilometer away from the hut. Carry buckets of water? I don't have any buckets. I had to invent a storage and transportation system. Method 1. Birch bark vessels. Birch bark is an amazing material. I learned how to make not only a covering for a hut out of it, but also water containers. I took a large sheet of birch bark, 30 by 40 centimeters, folded it into a cone and sewed it with nettle threads. The seam was smeared with spruce resin. The result was a light, durable vessel with a capacity of about 3 liters. I made 5 of them. It was enough for a day. Every morning I went to the spring with 4 birch bark cones. I filled them up and carefully carried them back. The journey took about an hour round trip. On the way, I collected firewood, mushrooms, and berries. Multitasking has become second nature to me. I had a underscore quote underscore two underscore set up in my hut. 3 stones stacked in a pyramid are the hearth. Above it is a tripod made of poles. There is a flat stone with a depression on the tripod. I found it in the river, knocked out the core with another stone for a long time. This is my quote 3. She poured water into it and lit a fire under it. Boiled for 10 minutes, just in case. Boiled water was stored in other birch bark vessels, which had already cooled down. But then a new problem arose. The water quickly quote underscore 4 underscore, acquired a musty taste. I found the solution in the corner. I crushed the charcoal from the campfire into powder and filled it to the bottom of the vessels. Charcoal is a natural filter that absorbs odors and some impurities. Method 2. Carbon filter. I made a stationary filter, a birch bark tube with a diameter of 10 centimeters and a height of 50 centimeters. From below, there is a layer of fine gravel, then a layer of sand, then a thick layer of charcoal. From above again, sand and gravel. The water passing through all the layers was cleaned mechanically and chemically. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Things got more complicated in winter. The spring did not freeze, constant temperature plus 4 degrees Celsius, but the approach to it was covered with ice. I had to pave a path and sprinkle it with sand. It was harder to carry water now. The birch bark vessels froze, and my hands stuck to the wet surface. I've adapted to wrap moss around them, both thermal insulation and protection from frostbite on my fingers. The biggest problem was toilet business. Yes, I'm sorry for the details, but there are no unimportant topics in survival. My biological waste could have polluted the spring. I had to organize a quote underscore 5 underscore 100 meters down the slope, away from the watercourse. A deep pit, which was filled in after each use with a mixture of earth and ashes from a campfire. The ash disinfects, the earth recycles. In the spring, when the snow came down, I discovered another source of water: icicles. Yes, the usual icicles hanging from the southern rocky outcrop. The purest distillate. I put birch bark vessels under them, collected them drop by drop. Slow, but what a water. Soft, without impurities, almost like distilled water. Summer has brought new opportunities and new dangers. Rainwater. I made a collection system, large burdock leaves directed into birch bark troughs that led to birch bark reservoirs. In one good downpour, she collected up to 50 liters. But rainwater also needs to be boiled, as it may contain dust, fungal spores, and combustion products from distant forest fires. Gorenya. By the end of the summer, I had a whole water infrastructure. The spring is the main source of rain collections.
Through the fog,
reserved
she leads
for
me to
dry
the
weather.
spring.
Carbon filter,
The veil parts
pre-cleaning,
to reveal the hidden
stone
waters.
boiler, heat treatment, storage capacity of 20 liters, daily supply. But the most important thing is that I have learned to quote 6 ton the water, not just to drink when you want, but to understand how much your body needs. More in the heat, less in the cold. Extra for physical work. I began to notice the first signs of dehydration: dry mouth, dark urine, light dizziness, and immediately replenished the balance. One day, on a particularly hot August day, I conducted an experiment. I didn't drink all day, just worked, picking berries, harvesting firewood. By evening, my head was splitting, my muscles were cramping, and my mind was swimming. I drank half a liter of water, and it was like I was born again. Every cell in my body heaved a sigh of relief. Since then, I've had a ritual. Every morning, before doing anything, I drank a glass of warm water. Not because I was thirsty, but because it was necessary. How to refuel a car before a long journey. Water is no longer just a liquid. It has become a measure of time: morning trip to the spring; labor, carrying heavy vessels; care, boiling, filtering, storing. She reminded me of the fragility of life, the fact that even in the 21st century with its technology and comfort, a person remains dependent on a simple HO. Sometimes, sitting by the campfire with a cup of hot tea made from taiga herbs, I thought, in the city, I drank a bottle of mineral water, a cup of coffee, maybe a glass of juice during the day. I didn't even think about it. Here, Every sip is an achievement. Every cup is a victory. And you know, this victory was sweet. Sweet as spring water on a hot day, pure as a tear, vital like life itself. Fact: a person can live without water for 3 to 10 days, depending on the conditions. But with the loss of 2% of body weight, physical performance decreases. With 5%, hallucinations appear, and with 10%, death occurs. In the conditions of the taiga, with its physical exertion, these periods are reduced by half. A Year in the Taiga, Diary of a Forest Hermit. Chapter 4. Forest Table. Edible plants of the taiga. Hunger is a strange feeling. At first, it's just an emptiness in the stomach, then weakness, then irritability, and then you start seeing food everywhere. Every leaf, every blade of grass, every mushroom. And it's dangerous, because in the taiga, the poisonous always grows next to the edible. Sometimes they look like twins. My first forest lunch consisted of what I knew for sure: lingonberries. There was a lot of it, whole glades on sunny slopes. The berries are sour, tart, but juicy. I ate a handful and my stomach rejoiced. Then I found blueberries, then blueberries. For 3 weeks, I ate almost.
After blanching, squeeze the nettle spinach firmly. Press to extract the bright green juice. This enriches the flavor.
Exclusively berries, and she got severe diarrhea. It turned out that berries are good, but
Let's examine this mushroom cap and stem. I'll use this small knife for a clean cut. Now, into the notebook for my notes.
you need fiber, protein, and fats. Attention! A mono diet of berries leads to digestive disorders and does not provide adequate nutrition. Taiga cuisine should be diverse. I had to remember the university botany course. Fortunately, I was a good student. And I had time, whole days to walk, watch, study, try. In small portions, very small. Lingonberry, Vaccinium vitis idea, an evergreen shrub, the leaves are leathery, shiny. The berries are red and ripen in August and September. It can be eaten fresh, dried, soaked. The leaves are an excellent tea brew. They have a diuretic effect. It is better to collect in the morning after the dew falls. The first discovery: nettles. Yes, the one that burns. Young nettle shoots scalded with boiling water are an excellent source of vitamins, especially vitamin C. I made nettle spinach. I collected the tops of the plants, blanched them in boiling water, squeezed them, added them to the soup. Taste. Specific, but the body was grateful. Dioecious nettle, Urtica dioica. Collect with gloves or tight mittens. Young shoots, up to 15 centimeters, are the most tender. It contains iron, calcium, vitamins A, C, and K. It loses its burning properties after heat treatment. It can be dried for the winter. Mushrooms have become my passion and my fear. I knew the main types: horseradish, podberezoviki, siroeshki, but there are hundreds of them in the taiga, and some deadly poisonous ones. I've developed a rule: don't touch an unfamiliar mushroom. Even if he's handsome, even if it smells delicious, even if you really want to eat. My identification method is, first I look at the cap, then at the stem, then at the plates, then I make a cut. I see if the flesh does not change color. I'm sniffing. If everything matches the description in memory, I take one mushroom. I'm taking it home. I boil it in a separate bowl. I try a small piece. I've been waiting for 2 hours. If everything is fine, the mushroom is edible. That's how I discovered chanterelles. Not the orange ones they sell in stores, but real taiga ones, pale yellow, with a funnel-shaped cap. Their advantage? They are almost never wormy. And they are not to be confused with poisonous doppelgangers. Seasonality of taiga gifts. Spring, the first greenery, nettles, cornflowers, sorrel, the buds of trees. Summer, berries, strawberries, blueberries, mushrooms, edible herbs. Autumn, mushrooms, massive growth, berries, cranberries, cedar nuts. Winter, harvesting, dried mushrooms and berries, bark of some trees. In the fall, a miracle happened. I found a cedar tree. Small trees with small but delicious nuts. Collecting them was tedious. The cones were small and prickly, but nuts. It was a real celebration. Proteins, fats, calories. I ate them by handfuls, dried them in reserve, and ground them into flour. But the biggest discovery happened in late autumn, when snow had already fallen. I was walking through a frozen swamp and saw red dots on a white background. Cranberries. It is not afraid of frosts. It even becomes sweeter after frosts. I collected a whole birch bark basket. Cranberries have become my main source of vitamins for the winter. Marsh cranberry, Oxycoccus palustris. It grows in sphagnum swamps. The berries ripen in September, but they can be harvested all winter from under the snow. It is rich in vitamin C, benzoic acid, a natural preservative. It is well stored frozen or soaked. In winter, I had to master quote, botany, the bark of trees. Yes, some trees have edible inner bark, bast, especially pine and willow. I peeled off the top layer of bark, scraped off the inner soft layer, dried, ground into flour. She mixed it with cedar flour, added water, and baked tortillas on hot stones. The taste, like sawdust, but it was food. Spring has become a test. Quote, 3 is what the Taiga people call this period. Stalks are coming to an end. There are no fresh herbs yet. The berries are not ripe. I ate the buds of trees. Birch ones are especially good. The first shoots of bracken requires prolonged soaking and boiling, and the rhizomes of susaka. But the most interesting thing started when I started combining products. I came up with a quote for water, dried mushrooms, dried nettles, pine nuts, some dried fish. I cooked it for 2 hours on low heat. It turned out to be a thick, rich stew. High-calorie, vitamin-rich, satisfying. Another discovery, teas. Not just tea, but herbal preparations. Ivan tea, cypress, leaves fermented, dried. Lingonberry and blueberry leaves. Linden flowers. I found one tree at the edge of the forest. Rosehip, harvested in autumn, dried. Each collection had its own taste and properties. Ivan tea calmed, rosehip invigorated, lingonberry leaf helped with colds. By the end of the year, I knew about 50 edible plants. She didn't just know the names, but understood when to assemble them, how to process them, and what to combine them with. I had my own harvest calendar, my own forest garden. But the main thing is that I have learned gratitude. Every time I picked berries, I left some to the birds and animals. Cutting the mushroom did not destroy the mycelium. When collecting nettles, I took them only from every third plant. Taiga fed me, and I tried not to be greedy. One day, in a particularly fruitful mushroom year, I gathered a basket full of aspen trees. I was sitting cleaning them by the campfire, and suddenly I realized I'm happy. Not because I've had enough, although that too, but because I've become a part of this forest. Not an invader, not a consumer, but a part of it. Like a squirrel that stores nuts, like a bear that eats berries, like a bird pecking at seeds. Quote 7, I said to Taiga, and Taiga seemed to have heard, because the next day I found a clearing with strawberries, like I've never seen before. The berries are large, sweet, and fragrant. I ate them lying on the warm ground and laughed. She was laughing with happiness, from simple, earthly berry happiness. And then I made strawberry jam. No, not in banks. I just mashed the berries, mixed them with a little honey. I found wild bees, but that's another story, and dried them in thin layers in the sun. It turned out to be sweet, chewy plates, a delicacy. This is how the taiga turned from a place of survival into a place of life. And I went from a hungry refugee to a well-fed housewife, with my garden, with its own kitchen, with his own, albeit strange but so rich, table. It is important to remember, before using any unfamiliar plant, be sure to check its edibility. Use the 4-sample rule: appearance, smell, skin contact, apply juice on the wrist, wait 15 minutes, microsample, put a small piece on the tongue, do not swallow, spit it out, wait 2 hours. Chapter 5. Fishing in the Taiga. Fish. At first it was just a word. Then there's the obsession. Then, salvation.
Sitting wet and hungry by the riverbank, eyes fixed on ripples, a homemade rod resting beside me. The fish feeding along the shore at dawn, the woman studies the water for feeding cues, mossy bank and damp earth in the background.
Protein, fats, calories, everything that was missing from my berry and mushroom. mushroom diet. The first attempts were comical. I tried to fish with my hands, as I saw in documentaries about bears. I sat for hours on the shore, frozen, wet, empty-handed. The fish splashed at my feet, teasing me. I was angry, crying, shouting at
Morning check of the muzzles. Sharpening these rose thorns on a stone, hooked through a gleaming grayling.
the river, uselessly. Then the brain turned on. I'm a biologist, damn it! I must remember something about ichthyology. I started with observations. She came to the river at different times every day. I noticed that in the morning the fish are feeding near the shore, where the water has warmed up overnight. It goes deep during the day.
See how the entrance funnels inward? And the branches block the exit, trapping anything inside.
He returns again in the evening. There are certain places, backwaters behind boulders, areas with a reverse current, bushes hanging
The ambush spots are here, along these backwaters and reverse currents, and these bushes dipping into the river provide cover.
over the water. There's a fish standing there, resting. The first tackle was primitive, a straight stick, a line of nettle fibers. It took a long time to weave, but it turned out firmly. A hook. There was a problem with the hook. There is no metal. I had to improvise. The first hook was made from a fish bone. I found the skeleton of a fish on the shore, chose a suitable bone, sharpened a stone against a stone, and made a hole for a fishing line. It turned out crookedly, but it was a hook. I took the simplest bait, a worm. I dug in the damp earth under old tree stumps. She put it on a bone hook and threw it into the pool, and waited. 1 hour. 2. The sun was setting when I felt the first poke, then the second one, then a jerk. My heart began to pound, and my hands began to tremble. She pulled, afraid to break the flimsy nettle line, and here it is, the first catch. A small grayling about 20 centimeters, silver with a pink tint, beating on the shore. I looked at him and didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She was crying, and she was laughing at the same time. But grayling alone is not food. It's an appetizer. It was necessary to improve the gear. I started making hooks out of wild rose thorns. She found the largest, strongest thorns, cut them off with a piece of twig, and sharpened the tip. It turned out even better than from a bone. There was already a natural bend. I improved the fishing line. I began to weave not from nettles but from horsehair. No, there were no horses in the taiga, but I found it. Bear's hair. Yes, it's risky, but the bears are molting, leaving patches of fur on the trees, which itch. I put it together, washed it, and wove it. Tensile strength is several times higher than nettle strength. The rod has also evolved. The simple stick was replaced by a composite rod made of 2 flexible willow rods connected by tendons, from the same fish that I ate. A reel appeared, just a fork on the handle, on which the fishing line was wound. But the real breakthrough came when I came up with a trap. The muzzle. A basket made of willow twigs with a funnel-shaped entrance. The principle is simple. The fish swims inside, but it cannot swim out. The entrance is narrow, directed inward. She put her muzzle in a small channel, blocking it with branches so that the fish could only pass through the trap. I checked in the morning. There were 3 roach fighting inside. It was a celebration. I was jumping for joy like a child. Since then, fishing has become a system. The 2 muzzles were standing constantly. She used a fishing rod to catch live bait, a small fish that she used as bait for larger fish. I learned to distinguish between species. Grayling loves fast water and insects. Pike stands in ambush at driftwood. Perch walks in flocks. Everything changed in winter. The river is frozen. But life continued under the ice. I made a peshnya, a pointed stick with a stone tip, punching holes. I shortened the fishing rod and made a fishing line out of deer veins. I found the remains gnawed by wolves. Hooks. The winter hooks were the most difficult. I made them from frozen fish. I took a small fish, froze it in the form of a hook, then smeared it with fat for strength. These hooks melted in the mouth of the fish, releasing the tip. Winter fishing is a meditation. You sit over the hole, look into the blue depths, feel every bite through your fingers. Cold, very cold. But when you pull a fluttering fish out of the hole, you forget about the cold and loneliness. In the spring, a miracle happened. Spawning. The fish came in shoals. I could gain enough in an hour to last a week. But ethics came into play here. I only took as much as I could eat and prepare. I skipped the rest of the fish, because if you take all of it, there won't be anything in a year. Harvesting fish has become a separate art. Smoking. I made a smokehouse out of birch bark, smoldering coals, alder sawdust for smoke. Drying. Strung on rods, hung out in the sun and wind. Freezing. In winter, I just left it in the cold. Salting. Salt. There was a problem with salt. I found a salt marsh 2 days away. I went there once a month, brought clay soaked in salt, boiled it, and got crystals. By the end of the year, I wasn't just a fisherman. I was a practicing ichthyologist. She knew the habits of each species, the sites and seasonal migrations. I had my own fish calendar. But the most important thing is that I have learned gratitude. I thanked every fish I caught. She said, "Thank you for your life, which will be my life." Maybe it sounds weird, but in the taiga, everything becomes simpler and clearer. You eat to live, and you understand the value of this life, both your own and the one that has become your food. One day, on a clear summer day, I was sitting on the shore with a fishing rod. I caught a small grayling. I took out the hook. I was already going to... And she let him go. The fish darted into the depths, leaving a silver trail behind it. I sat and watched the trail dissolve into the water, and she was smiling. Because I realized that I am no longer afraid of hunger. I know the river. I know fish. I know how to get food. And this knowledge is more precious than any fish, more expensive than any catch. It was freedom. Strange, taiga, fishy freedom. Chapter 6. Silent Hunting. Traps and Tracking Meat. This word became an obsession in autumn, when the first frosts froze the earth and the berries and mushrooms moved away. The body demanded protein, fat, and warmth from the inside. The fish helped, but I wanted meat. Real, red, smelling of blood and life. But how to get an animal without a gun? Without a bow? Without anything but a knife and a mind? I started with the simplest thing, with studying. She became a tracker. I walked around the neighborhood every morning looking for footprints. At first, I couldn't make out anything, just footprints on the ground. Then I started to see the difference. A hare leaves paired footprints, a fox leaves a chain, a wolf leaves a straight line, and a bear leaves club-footed footprints with claws. I learned to read the forest like a book. A broken branch at a height of 1 meter, an elk passed. The stripped bark on a pine tree, the bear marked the territory. A pile of feathers with tufts of fluff, a lynx had lunch here. The first trap was for a hare, the simplest loop of nettle cord suspended above the animal trail at the height of a rabbit's head. The hare runs, gets his head into the noose, and the noose tightens. In theory. In practice, the hares turned out to be smarter. They avoided the trap, jumped over it, and even chewed through the cord once. 3 weeks of empty loops. Despair. Then I realized my mistake. I set a trap where I saw footprints, but the footprints are the past. We need to predict the future. Where will the hare be tomorrow? Where will he go after the rain? Where will he feed when the first snow falls? I began to study habits. Hares love willow saplings, especially after rain. They walk the same trails, but not every day. They prefer to travel at dawn and dusk. I rearranged the hinges, not on the trail, but in the feeding area. Not at head level, but just below. The hare lowers his head when he eats. I used a bait, a bunch of young willow. And here it is, the first success. In the morning, a white hare was struggling in a noose, which had already begun to change its skin for winter. My hands were shaking as I approached. The beast stared at me with big, dark eyes, struggling in its last convulsions. I felt sick. I wanted to let go, but the hunger was stronger. I killed him as fast as I could, cut his throat with a sharp stone. Blood gushed out in a scarlet fountain. I cried while butchering the carcass. I cried with pity, with gratitude, with horror of what I had done. But in the evening, when I was eating roast rabbit meat by the campfire, I cried in a different way. From happiness. From the fact that the body finally got what it craved. Every cell rejoiced. After the hare came the squirrels. I came up with a pressure trap for them. A heavy log propped up with a stick and a cedar nut bait under the log. The squirrel pulls the nut, the stick slips out, and the log falls. Brutal, but effective. Proteins have become the main source of meat in winter. Small but fat, with tender meat. I didn't throw away the skins. I dried them, cleaned them, sewed them into a blanket. By the end of winter, I had a blanket of 30 squirrel skins, warm, light, and smelling of smoke and woods. But the real challenge was hunting ungulates. Moose, deer, roe deer, that's where the real supply of meat, fat, skins is. But how to catch an animal weighing 300 kilograms? I came up with a pit trap. I've been digging for a week. The pit is 2 meters deep, 1 meter in diameter, on an animal trail. Above is a deck of thin branches sprinkled with leaves and needles. There are log fences on the sides, guiding the beast straight into the trap. I waited a month. I checked every morning. Empty. I thought the animals had smelled a human scent. She began to disguise herself. Before installing the trap, she rubbed her hands and tools with needles, earth, and silt from the river. I went to the trap only against the wind, and then one morning, there was a young moose calf in the pit, 1-year-old, still without the mighty horns, scared, banging against the walls, eyes full of horror. It was the most difficult moment. The calf was too big to kill quickly, throwing stones. I cried, throwing every stone. I cried when he finally fell. She cried while butchering the carcass, but this moose gave me so much meat that it was enough for 2 months. I melted the fat, got lard for cooking, and lubricants for the skin. The bones were used for tools, needles were made from the ribs, and scrapers for hides were made from the shin bones. The tendons became threads. I tanned the skin, and it turned out to be a wonderful warm litter. After that, I didn't set traps for a big animal for a long time. It's too hard mentally. Switched to a bird. Grouse, grouse, grouse. I came up with snares for birds, loops on flexible rods. I put them on the current where birds gather for mating games, or in the berry fields where they feed. Poultry meat is tender and dietary. I found eggs in the nests. I didn't take everything, I left them for procreation. In the spring, I discovered hunting wild game. The capercaillie on the current is a unique phenomenon. The bird gets so carried away with singing that it goes deaf for a few seconds. You can get almost close. I didn't kill grouse on the current. It seemed like unsportsmanlike. Instead, she set snares on the approaches to the current. Summer has brought new prey, rodents, muskrats in the river, marmots in the meadows. There is little meat, but the fat is valuable. Muskrat skins are a wonderful fur for a hat. By the fall, I had become an experienced hunter. She knew a dozen types of traps, loops, crushers, pits, snares, mouths. She could read footprints as well as any taiga ranger. She understood the habits of animals, their migrations and habits. But the main thing is that she has developed ethics. I didn't take more than I needed. She did not kill females with cubs. She did not completely destroy the nest. She took only adult males, old or sick animals. She thanked every hunted animal. One winter, I found an old wolf in a trap, one-eyed, with his teeth knocked out and his fur in tangles. He was already almost dead from hunger and cold. I freed him, brought him to the hut, warmed him up, fed him. Then he let go. He left, turning to say goodbye, and he never came to my traps again. Maybe it's a superstition, but I believe that taiga sees. She sees how you treat her children, and he responds in kind. Hunting was no longer just about getting food. It became a dialogue. A difficult, cruel, but honest dialogue between me and Les. I'm taking my life to prolong mine. And I give something in return: respect, gratitude, careful attitude. Sometimes, sitting by the campfire with a piece of fried meat, I think, in the city, I bought meat at the store, beautifully packaged, without blood, without suffering. Anonymous. Here, I know every animal I eat. I know how it lived, how it died, and this knowledge makes me more human. Strange, but true. Taiga taught me to appreciate life, all my life, both his own and someone else's, because here they are inseparable. Like two sides of the same coin, as a hunter and prey, like life and death. And in this unity there is a terrible, ancient animal truth, the one that the city has long forgotten, but Taiga remembers, and reminds those who decide to talk to her. Chapter 7. White Silence. Winter Survival. Winter came unexpectedly. I woke up one morning and the world changed. Everything became white, silent, and motionless. Snow covered the ground with a 30-centimeter layer, trees bent under the weight of snowcaps. The river froze, turning into milky glass. The first reaction is delight. The beauty is indescribable. Every twig is covered in frost. Every snowdrift shimmers in the sun with diamond chips. The second reaction is horror. The temperature dropped to -20. His breath turned into ice crystals. My fingers were numb for a minute in the open air. The first day of wintering was the hardest. The hut, which perfectly protected from the autumn rains, turned out to be helpless in the face of frost. An icy wind blew through the cracks in the walls, frost covered the inner surfaces, and the water in the birch bark vessels froze overnight. I spent the night around the campfire, not closing my eyes. She added firewood every 2 hours, otherwise the fire would go out and the cold would seep into her bones. In the morning, I realized that I couldn't survive like this. Changes are needed, urgently. The first is the insulation of the hut. I've collected all the moss that hasn't been covered by snow yet. I lined the walls with it from the outside and from the inside. Moss is an excellent insulator. Besides, it absorbs moisture. It took 3 days. My hands were covered with small cracks from the cold, but it got a few degrees warmer inside the hut. The second is the vestibule. I added a small room made of snow blocks to the entrance. Snow, it turns out, is a great insulator. He cut it with a deer rib saw, stacked it like bricks. The vestibule became a buffer zone. Cold air remained there. Warm air did not leave the hut. The third is clothing. My city jacket and pants were no good. I had to sew. I used the skins of hares, squirrels, and muskrats. First, I made them. I scraped off the fat and mesdra with a bone scraper, then soaked them in a solution of ash and water, kneaded them until soft. The first thing I did was make unts, made of rabbit skins, with the fur inside. I doubled the soles, a layer of fur, a layer of birch bark for waterproofness, and another layer of fur. My feet didn't freeze in these boots, even at -30. The jacket is made of squirrel skins. I sewed 30 skins with sinew threads. Uncomfortable, heavy, but warm. The hood was trimmed with fox fur to protect the face from the wind. Trousers, pants, were a problem. I made them out of moose hide, but they turned out to be tough, like cardboard. I wore it until I found a way to soften it. I began to rub it with fish oil and knead it every evening by the campfire. After a week, the pants became as soft as leather. But clothes are only half the story. I had to learn how to move in the snow. The first trips out for firewood turned into torture. I fell through to the waist. I spent my strength on every step. I made snowshoes. He wove a frame out of flexible willow twigs and stretched a net of deer veins over it. He fastened it to his legs with straps made of the same leather. Now he could walk in the snow, almost without falling through. The movement speed has tripled. Firewood. In winter, firewood is life. Without fire, you'll die overnight. But where to get firewood when everything is covered with snow? I found dead wood, dead trees, still standing. They are dry inside, they burn well. deadwood, fallen trees partially covered with snow. He chopped them with a stone axe, made of strong stone and sticks fastened with tendons. It was hard, slow, but there was no other way out. The most valuable resource is resinous spruce branches. They flare up well, give a lot of heat. I collected them by combing the forest. Noticed, the fir trees on the south side have more resin in the bark. Firewood storage is a separate science. I put a woodpile under a birch bark canopy so that the snow wouldn't fall asleep. I kept a week's supply in advance. I replenished it every morning regardless of the weather. Water. The river was frozen, but the spring was gushing under the ice. I cut a hole and reinforced the edges with logs so that it wouldn't freeze. I made a snow canopy over the hole. Every day he carried water in birch bark vessels wrapped in fur so that it would not freeze on the way. But the scariest thing about the taiga winter is not the cold, but the darkness. The days were getting shorter, the nights longer. In December, the sun was visible for only 4 hours. The rest of the time is the polar night, a blue twilight turning to black. The depression hit in mid-December. You're sitting in a hut. It's dark. Only the light from the fire. The wind is howling outside the window. The days merge into one endless gray nightmare. I want to scream, cry, run anywhere. Saved by the system. A strict daily routine. Rising at sunrise, even if it's only 4 hours of light. Breakfast. A trip for firewood. Avoiding traps. Lunch. Repair of clothes and tools. Supper. Reading. Rereading his own notes on the birch bark. Dream. And the light. I made fat lamps, flat stones with a recess, a wick made of plant fluff, melted animal fat. They burned dimly, smoked, but gave light. It's impossible to read with them, but my hands are busy sewing, weaving, and mending. Food is scarce in winter. Dry stocks. Dried meat, dried mushrooms and berries, fish meal, dried fish ground into powder. Sometimes it was possible to catch a hare or a squirrel. Sometimes I found frozen cranberries under the snow, a real treat. Christmas was the hardest. He remembered the date from the notches on the pillar, 25th of December. There's a Christmas tree, gifts, and a family in town. Here there is darkness, cold, loneliness. I made a party for myself. I found a small Christmas tree and decorated it with icicles and rowan berries. They were preserved on the trees. I cooked a special dinner, meat broth with dried mushrooms, fish meal tortillas, tea with cloudberries, the last jar, the shore since autumn. I sat by the campfire and looked at the fire, and suddenly I realized I'm not alone. Taiga is with me. I have the stars outside my window with me. There are millions of them visible on clear nights. I have memories with me. And hope for spring. Winter was testing my strength, physically and mentally. There were days when I wanted to give up everything, lie down in the snow and fall asleep. But every time I found the strength to stand up, make a fire, take one more step. March brought the first thaw. The snow began to settle and water dripped from the roofs. The days have lengthened. The first thawed areas appeared, and with them, the first greens. Nettles broke out from under the snow, the first shoots of sleep. When I saw the first green blade of grass, I started crying. From joy, from relief, from the realization that I survived the winter, the harshest, longest, darkest winter of my life. Now I know that winter in the taiga is not just a season. This is a test. How fire tests gold. You either break down or you get stronger. I became stronger. He became different. I went out into the thawed ground that day, took off my fur hat and turned my face up to the sun. It was still cold in March, but it was the sun. Real, spring, alive. And I realized that the worst was over. I survived the winter, so I'll survive everything. Chapter 8. Pharmacy in a Snowdrift. Diseases and Self-Medication. The pain came quietly, like a thief in the night. At first, just aching joints, then chills, then fever, delirium. I was lying on the skins, shivering from the cold, even though it was hot by the campfire. The temperature rose so fast that I didn't have time to figure out what was going on. It was the flu. Or something similar. In the city, I would take a pill and call a doctor. It was just me, the taiga, and the coming winter. The first 3 days were a nightmare. Delirium, sweat, weakness. I couldn't get up to get some firewood. The fire was barely burning. The water in the vessels is frozen. Hunger twisted my stomach, but I didn't feel like eating. On the 4th day, I realized either I get up or I die. Gathering her last strength, she crawled towards the exit. The snow was hitting my face, and the wind was howling. I found a fir branch with cones. There were seeds in the cones. I chewed the bitter seeds. I drank a handful of snow. Then I remembered, when I was a child, my grandmother used to give me a decoction of pine buds when she had a cold. She crawled towards the pine tree. My hands wouldn't obey. My fingers wouldn't bend from the cold. I collected some kidneys and brought them to the hut. She lit a fire. With difficulty. The firewood was damp. It didn't want to flare up. She cried from impotence, but her hands did their job. She struck a chair, laid birch bark, fanned the coals. When the water in the stone boiled, I threw the kidneys into it. The smell was healing, resinous. She drank the decoction, burning her lips, and she fell asleep. Deep, heavy sleep. I woke up a day later. The temperature dropped.
This will keep the fire going.
I was still weak, but I could sit up.
I will survive
She could
and
think.
heal.
This case was a turning point. I realized that you can't get sick in the taiga. You can't afford to be weak. But if you get sick, you need to know how to be treated. She began to study medicinal plants. I remembered everything I knew from the botany course, from my grandmother's stories, from books. I started a quote 0 on birch bark. I wrote down the symptoms, what helped, what didn't. The first discovery, Ivan tea, fireweed. Its leaves were brewed for colds, headaches, as a sedative. Harvested in the summer, fermented. I rolled the leaves into sausages, left them for a day, then dried them by the campfire. It turned out to be a fragrant tea, almost like black. Second, fir sap. Fir resin is a natural antiseptic. Wounds, cuts, abrasions, lubricated with gum. I chewed on a toothache. One tooth still hurt. I had to pull it out with homemade forceps from a branch. This is a separate horror story. Third, marsh rosemary. I found him on the edge of the swamp. A strong, intoxicating smell. It was used as an expectorant for coughing, but be careful, it is poisonous in large doses. In winter, I faced a new problem, frostbite, fingertips, nose, cheeks. The first degree is whiteness, loss of sensitivity. She treated it with gradual warming. She rubbed it with snow, then with warm hands. In any case, not immediately to the fire. The tissues will die. The second degree is bubbles. It was on my ears. I treated a badger with fat, trapped it. She smeared it with a thin layer, tied it with a nettle fiber cloth, as clean as possible in the taiga. There was no third degree, thank God, but I knew the theory, tissue blackening, dying. There's only amputation here. I thought about it with horror. How do I cut off my own finger? Fortunately, it didn't come in handy. Another attack, scurvy. In winter, when there were no fresh herbs, I noticed the first signs. Bleeding gums, weakness, joint pain. I remembered, I need vitamin C. But where can I get it in winter? V found the answer. Conifers. Pine needles. He began to chew the young shoots of a pine tree. It's bitter and disgusting, but it helps. I made an infusion, crushed the needles, poured warm water, and infused for several hours. I drank this, quote, 1 every day. The gums stopped bleeding after a week. Stomach problems were constant. Diarrhea from stale food, constipation from a monotonous diet. Treated. For diarrhea, oak bark, astringent, cherry berries, harvested in autumn, dried. For constipation, buckthorn bark, laxative, vegetable oil from pine nuts, crushed with a stone, collected precious drops. The worst thing happened in the spring. Cut my foot on a rock. The wound is deep, the blood is gushing. Panic, stitches, antibiotics in the city. There's dirt, infection, gangrene. He acted automatically. I washed the wound with boiled water and ash. An alkaline medium kills bacteria. He cauterized the edges of the wound with a red-hot knife. The pain is hellish but bearable. I applied a bandage made of clean, ironed by the fire cloth, greased with fir resin. I changed the dressing every day, washed the wound with chamomile decoction. I found it in the summer, dried it. The wound festered for 2 weeks. The temperature was rising, but I struggled. I drank Ivan tea with honey. I found wild bees, but more on that later, and made cold compresses. When the wound finally healed, I cried. From pain, from fear, from relief. The scar remained large and red, but he saved my leg. I encountered ticks in the summer. I woke up one morning and there was a lump on my neck. The tick bit deep. I would have gone to the hospital in the city. I had to act on my own here. I remembered, you cannot pull out. The head will remain inside. You need to stop breathing. Lubricated the tick with fat, blocked the spiracles. I waited for half an hour. The tick started to come out on its own. Then he carefully inserted a needle, made from a fishbone, and twisted it counterclockwise. I treated the wound with oleo resin. I've been watching myself for 2 weeks to see if I have a fever or rash. It's gone. By the end of the year, I had a whole pharmacy. Antipyretics, willow bark, natural aspirin, lime blossom, antiseptics, fir resin, juniper, wound healing, plantain, yarrow. Sedatives, valerian, roots, motherwort. Digestive, mint, St. John's wort. I dried everything, stored it in birch bark boxes, and signed it with charcoal on the bark. But the most important medicine was not herbal. It was optimism. Yes, it sounds corny, but in loneliness, in illness, in despair, only the belief that it would get better saved from death. I've worked out a ritual. Every morning, even if I was sick, even if I couldn't get up, I said out loud, quote 2, and I believed in it. And it was getting better. One day, in the midst of a spring cold, I was lying with a fever, coughing, and suddenly I laughed. Through the cough, through the weakness, because I understood. I become my doctor, my pharmacy, my hospital. And there was something incredibly free about it. Do not depend on clinics, prescriptions, doctors. To know your body, to know nature, to know how they interact. Of course, there were moments of horror. When the wound wasn't healing, when the temperature didn't drop, when I was thinking, quote, 3. But each time, nature suggested a way out. Grass, root, berry. Now, I don't look at every plant as a simple plant, but as a potential cure. A friend who can save a life. And I say thank you. Every leaf, every blade of grass, because in the taiga you either learn from nature or you die. And I chose to study. Chapter 9. Neighbors in the Taiga, the world of wild animals. At first I was afraid of them. Every rustle in the bushes, every crack of a branch, my heart stopped. A bear? The wolf? A lynx? But gradually fear turned to curiosity, and then to true friendship. No, not in the human sense. In taiga. We became neighbors, sometimes wary, sometimes curious, sometimes indifferent to each other. The birds were the first to get used to me. The chickadees discovered that there was always food near my hut. I cleaned the fish, left the scales and giblets. At first, we were careful, sitting on distant branches. Then one of the bravest came down, grabbed a piece, and flew away. A week later, there were already 24 of them. I made a feeding trough, just a plaque on a tree. Every morning I spread out some grains. I found field mice in the fields, took away their stalks, sorry mice, but birds also need to eat. The tits started coming regularly. At first they were silent, then they began to chatter as if they were talking to me. One winter day, in a heavy snowstorm, I left the vestibule door ajar. I looked in an hour later. A pair of tits were sitting on the threshold, warming themselves. They weren't scared when I approached. They looked at me with black, beady eyes. I poured the grains right on the floor. They nodded, looking at me. Since then, they have become my most loyal neighbors. Squirrels. Oh, the squirrels were a special case. I saw a squirrel for the first time in early autumn. Red-haired, fluffy, with tassels on her ears. She was sitting on a pine tree, holding a cone in her paws, quickly gnawing out the seeds. She noticed me and froze. We stared at each other for a minute, then she snorted and scampered off through the branches. But she came back a week later. Carefully at first, then more boldly. I started leaving pine nuts on the stump. The squirrel took them, quickly hid them behind his cheeks swelled up like balls, then took them away somewhere. I watched her. She made hiding places. She buried the nuts in the moss, in the ground, under the roots of the trees. Dozens of hiding places. She ate them in winter. One winter, a squirrel came right to the hut. She stood on her hind legs, tapping the log with her front paws, demanding food. I took out the nuts. She took it right out of my hand. Soft paws, sharp claws. Then she sat down next to him on a snowdrift and began to eat. She's been coming every day since. I named her Ginger. Foxes. Foxes were cunning. I've seen their footprints often, but rarely myself. One morning I discovered that a fish was missing from my smokehouse. Fox tracks. He set a trap, but then changed his mind and removed it. I felt sorry for the fish, but for the fox, too. She just wanted to eat. But the story of the fox was still ahead. In the spring, during the melting of the snow, I heard strange noises by the river. Squeak! Squeal! A fox with cubs has crept up. 3 fluffy lumps were playing by the hole. The mother was lying next to her, watching. I froze, afraid to breathe. The cubs were fidgeting, tumbling, biting each other's tails. One of them ventured further away, but his mother immediately grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and returned him to the burrow. I visited them for several days in a row. I sat in the distance, watching. The fox knew I was there. Sometimes she looked right at me, but she didn't run away. Apparently, she realized that I wasn't dangerous. One day I brought her a fish. I put it on a rock 100 meters from the hole. There were no fish the next day. She continued to bring it every few days. The fox accepted my gifts. We never got close to each other, but there was a kind of truce between us. Bears. The fear of the bear lived in me all the time. I saw their footprints, huge with claw marks. I found droppings, places where they scratched their backs against trees. But I didn't see the bear itself until the fall. I remember the first meeting in detail. I was picking lingonberries on the slope. Suddenly I heard the crackling of branches. I looked up, and he was standing about 50 meters away. Brown, huge. The head is big. The paws are like shovels. We looked at each other. His heart was beating so hard that it seemed he could hear it. The bear stood up on its hind legs. I took a look. He sniffed the air. Then he got down and calmly walked in the other direction. He didn't even run. He just walked away as if he'd said. I sat on the ground shaking for another half hour. Then I realized he didn't want to eat me. He just lived here. And I lived here. And we have enough space not to interfere with each other. After that, I saw the bear several more times, always at a distance. He ignored me. I learned to make noise in the forest, to sing, to talk to myself, to tap a stick on a tree, so that the animals know, I'm here, go the other way. It worked. Wolves. I was more afraid of wolves than bears, but I only saw them once. In winter, on a moonlit night. I came out of the hut and they were standing at the edge of the forest. A pack, 6 or 7, gray, thin, with burning eyes. They were looking at me. I froze. One, the largest, took a step forward, then another one. I didn't run. I knew it was useless to run. Instead, she screamed. Not out of fear, but as loudly and sharply as I could. She took a burning brand from the campfire. Fortunately, the campfire was at the entrance, and picked it up. The wolves stopped. Then, slowly, without haste, they turned around and went into the forest. I never saw them again, but sometimes I heard howling at night, a beautiful, creepy, primal howl. She became the most unexpected friend. The viper. Yes, an ordinary viper. She lived under a big stone by a spring. The first time I met her in the summer, I was basking in the sun. Scared, of course, but the snake just looked at me with narrow eyes and slowly crawled away under the stone. I started walking around the place. But one day, when I was collecting water, I saw that the viper was lying curled up in a ring and was clearly ill. Moving slowly, looks weak. I took a chance and put a piece of fish next to it. The next day, the fish disappeared. Since then, I've sometimes left food for her. She's never been close, but she's used to my presence. Sometimes, when I came to get water, she would crawl out and bask on a rock. We were just there. By the end of the year, I realized, I am not a stranger in this forest. I'm a part of him. The animals accepted me, not as his own, but as a neighbor. Strange, smelling of smoke and human, but not dangerous. I've learned to understand them. I could tell by the birds' cries that a predator was approaching. According to the behavior of squirrels, there will be a storm. I've read whole stories about footprints in the snow. Here a hare ran away from a fox. Here a moose went to a watering hole. Here mice built a whole city under the snow. Sometimes, sitting by the campfire, I felt someone's eyes on me. When she turned around, there was a moose standing at the edge of the forest, or a lynx in a tree. Or just a pair of bird's eyes in the dark. They were watching me the same way I was watching them, and there was nothing wrong with that. It was naturally. It's like I've finally found my place, not in a city among people, and here, among the animals, birds, and trees. One winter night, I woke up to a sound. I looked out through the gap between the logs. There was an owl sitting on my woodpile. It's big and gray. She turned her head almost 180 degrees. She was looking right at me. Then she blinked slowly, and she flew away. I went back to the skins and took cover, and she was smiling in the dark, because I realized that I was accepted into this strange, wild, beautiful world, and it was the best feeling of my life, better than any human praise, any recognition, because it was real, like Taiga herself. What's up? How true? Chapter 10. Shadows of the Past, Encounters and Revelations. I haven't seen people for 9 months. For 9 months, it's just the forest, the animals, the sky, and me. And you know what? I almost forgot what a human face looks like. I saw my own reflection only in the river water, distorted and trembling. Sometimes I found myself talking to a squirrel as if it were a human being. Or I explained to the fox why I didn't bring any fish today. Madness? Maybe. But in the taiga, the boundaries are blurred. The first meeting happened unexpectedly. It was the end of August, and I was picking mushrooms on the far slope. I heard a sound, not a forest sound, metallic, sharp. She froze. Then the voices. Masculine. Rude. Hunters. My heart started pounding so hard that I thought they would hear me. She hid behind a huge fir tree and pressed herself against the trunk. I saw them through the branches, 2 men in camouflage, with guns. We walked slowly, smoked, talked about something of our own, about money, about drinking, about women. They passed within 100 meters of me. They didn't even look in my direction. And I stood there, not breathing, and thought, these are people, the same as I used to be. And it became scary, not for myself but for them. What are they doing here? Why did you come to my forest? Then I realized, this is not my forest. He's nobody's man, or all of them, and these men have the same right to it as I do. But when they left, I sat on the ground for a long time trembling, not from the cold, from what I remembered. There is another world. over there, beyond the taiga. The world of cars, money, and fuss. The world that I voluntarily left. The second meeting was different. In autumn, during the fall of leaves, I was walking along the path to the spring and saw the old man. Yes, a real old man, with a gray beard, a faded jacket, and a staff. He was sitting on a tree stump staring into the distance. At first I thought it was a hallucination. I've been alone too long. But no, he was real. He was breathing, steam coming from his mouth. I stopped, not knowing what to do. Escape? Approach? He turned his head. His eyes were bright and very clear. He saw me and smiled. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't scared. He just smiled like an old friend. Quote 1, he said softly. The voice is hoarse but kind. Quote 2, I managed to say. My voice sounded strange, unusual. I've almost forgotten how to speak like a human. Do you live here? He asked. Yes. How long? Since spring. He nodded, as if confirming something for himself. I see. I can see it in your eyes. The forest accepted it. We were silent for a while. Then he asked, Would you like some tea? I have one. I nodded. He took out a camping pot, a kettle, and a pack of tea from his backpack. Real, store-bought stuff. The smell struck me. So familiar, so far away. A small fire was lit. He made tea, poured it into a tin cup, and handed it to me. I drank, and tears flowed down my cheeks. From the taste, from the memories, from a simple human gesture, to share tea. He said that he was a forester, or rather, he was a forester. He's retired now, but he still walks in the taiga. He knows her like the back of his hand. He lives in a village 30 kilometers from here. Quote 9, he asked. I didn't know what to say. She told the truth. I'm tired, from everything. I wanted to understand myself. He nodded again. Got it? I'm starting. We sat there for 2 hours. They didn't talk much. They were mostly silent, staring at the fire. Then he got ready to leave. Quote 13. I said, and I was surprised by these words. Quote 14. He promised, and he left. I never saw him again. But sometimes he found things left by him on a stump by the trail. A pack of salt, a box of matches, a lump of sugar, as if he knew what I needed, or checking to see if I was still alive. The third meeting was the strangest. In winter, in a snowstorm. I was sitting in the hut, and suddenly there was a knock on the door. A real, human knock. Scared to death. Who can be in this weather? She opened it, and there was a man standing on the threshold. Young, about 30 years old. He was not dressed for the weather. A thin jacket, soaked sneakers. My face is blue from the cold, and my lips are shaking. Quote 15, he whispered. She dragged him inside, sat him down by the campfire, and gave him hot tea. He warmed up for an hour before he could speak coherently. It turned out to be a tourist. I got lost. I was walking with a group, fell behind, lost the trail. I wandered through the forest for 2 days. I lost my backpack, the map, the compass. Everything was left in the backpack. Quote 16, he asked, looking around the hut. Quote 17. Quote 18. Quote 19. He stayed with me for 3 days, until the blizzard subsided. I fed him, gave him tea, and treated his frostbitten fingers. He asked me a lot. Why am I here? Isn't it scary how I survive? I answered briefly. I didn't want to talk. I'm used to the silence. On the third day, the weather improved. I showed him the way to the trail, gave him food with me-dried meat, tortillas. Thank you, he said goodbye. You are extraordinary. I'm just living, I replied. He's gone. And I was alone again. But something has changed. After he left, I couldn't calm down for 3 days. His questions, his look, his surprise, all this brought me back to reality. The reality where my life seems like madness. I started thinking, what if I really am crazy? What if this year is not a search for yourself, but an escape? What if I'm just a coward who couldn't live among people? But then I went outside. I saw snow, trees, and the sky. I heard a chickadee scream, and I realized, no. I'm not crazy. I just found another way to be happy. Quieter, a simpler one, more real. There were other meetings, rare, fleeting ones, mushroom pickers in autumn, fishermen in the spring, hunters in winter. I've learned to avoid them, hiding when I heard voices, because every meeting destroyed my world. She was taking me back to where I'd escaped from. But the most important meeting did not happen with another person, but with myself, or rather, with the person I was before. One day in the spring, while sorting through my things, there were few of them, a knife, a mug, birch bark notes, I found a photograph, very small, twisted. I brought her with me. I forgot about her. I'm in the photo, a year ago, in the city, at a party. I'm smiling, wearing makeup and a beautiful dress. I looked at this girl and didn't recognize her. Who is she? What does she want? What does he dream about? I didn't remember. Her thoughts, her worries, her joys, everything seemed alien, distant, unimportant. And then I realized the main thing. This year, I have not just learned how to survive. I'm dead. That girl in the photo died, and another one was born in her place, the one who can listen to the forest. The one who understands the language of animals, the one that finds water on moss and predicts the weather on clouds. I don't regret the old one. She was happy in her own way, but I'm happy in a different way, deeper, quiet, present. Sometimes, on particularly clear nights, I go out of the hut, look at the stars and think, what if there, in the city, someone remembers me? Friends and family? Do they think I'm dead? Or did you just forget? But then I look at my hut, at the hair tracks in the snow, at the smoke from the chimney, and I understand. It doesn't matter, because here, now, I am, real, lively. And that's enough. More than enough. This is happiness, simple as a sip of water from a spring, quiet as a snowflake falling, eternal like the taiga.